From Washington, D.C. to the heart of America, welcome to Mark Alford's America. I'm freshman congressman from Missouri, Mark Alford, and I believe in America. I believe in you, and most importantly, I believe that our greatest days are still ahead of us. You know, each week we take you behind the scenes to share the stories, news, legislation, and meet the great people who are helping shape our nation. And today we're talking with Congresswoman Erin Houchin. She represents Indiana's 9th District. She's a proud mom, a community leader, small business owner. Right now, she serves as the Republican Freshman Leadership Representative. She plays a big role on the House Financial Services Committee, the House Rules Committee, and the House Education Workforce Committees. Before she got into this office, she represented Indiana as a state senator for 8 years, and she focused on things that were really important to Hoosiers: commerce and technology, veterans affairs and military. She's also a ranking member of the Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee. Erin owned and operated a PR company that focused on helping law enforcement communicate the good work that they do. And she got her bachelor's degree from Indiana University, her master's from George Washington University. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the 5th floor of Longworth Office Building, room 1516, Congresswoman Erin Houchin. Erin, good to have you here.
Thank you very much, Congressman Mark Alford. I'm very proud to serve with you as a freshman member of this class. You're a great addition.
Well, thank you.
I'm proud and thankful to be part of your radio program today.
It's been a fun 11 months, hasn't it? Has anything turned out the way you thought it would be in the 11 months?
It's been surprising. I think the first 6 months for me we were rocking and rolling, right? We were getting a lot of good stuff done for the American people.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of have gone through some rocky times, but I think going through those kinds of things makes us more resilient as we move forward. So I think our class is really good. Our group of freshmen is very, very talented, and it's been a good experience.
I was not in state legislature. I was not in politics at all before I got into this. What's the biggest difference between being in the state legislature now in U.S. Congress?
You can get a lot more done at the state level than you can at the federal level. Yeah. Our sessions would be, long session is January to the end of April, and short session January to mid-March. And during that time, I could get 10 bills done and signed into law. Or you could take some stuff away that maybe is not so good for people. Here, it moves really, really slowly, and it should. Our founders intended it to be the way that it is. We have a very small majority. It's a 5-seat majority right now, with Republicans controlling the House. We don't have the Senate, and we don't have the presidency. The American people wouldn't want the federal government to move quickly. So, yes, I think the biggest difference is that you can be more nimble and move legislation more quickly at the state and the local level than you can here. But I believe that's exactly the way the founders intended it to be.
Yeah, we've been doing this for 11 months now. You got on some great committees. The one that I want to concentrate on here, because I don't think people have a full understanding of how things operate here in Washington. And it was a big eye-opener for me. In fact, yesterday I was watching the Rules Committee operate. Explain what the Rules Committee is, why you're on it, and why it's important to Congress.
Thank you. I was surprised to be named to the Rules Committee. It wasn't something that I had thought about doing. I knew here, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, said, "Would you serve on the Rules Committee?" And when the Speaker asks you to serve in that capacity, you do. So that's how I ended up on the Rules Committee as a freshman member. We also have Nick Langworthy of New York, who's a freshman on the committee. But the Rules Committee is the smallest committee. There's 9 Republicans and 4 Democrats on the Rules Committee. It's also the oldest committee in Congress, and it still meets in the Capitol building. It's the only committee to meet in the Capitol building.
Right off the House chamber, outside the gallery on the 3rd floor,
Yep.
There's a hallway, and then the Rules Committee meets.
It meets there. And so we meet every week we're here, we have to pass a rule out of committee on any legislation we're considering on the floor that doesn't come to the floor on suspension. So this is pretty in the weeds, but when we fly in on our fly-in day, we did this week on Tuesday, we had a 6:30 p.m. vote on suspension votes. Those are bills that have to take 2/3 majority to pass, and they can be brought to the floor for a vote without going through the Rules Committee. Suspension votes.
Mm-hmm.
Votes that we consider later in the week are passed under it's called under a rule. So the Rules Committee must meet to consider what legislation is going to be considered for debate, and the rule that we vote on out of committee decides how those bills will be debated and what amendments will be allowed or not allowed. And so it plays a very important role in legislating, particularly in a Congress where Republicans have brought us back to what we call regular order. Under the prior administration, under the Democrats, almost no bill came to the floor under anything but a closed rule.
Which meant
no amendments could be offered by the rank and file members of Congress, which it deteriorates the power of the people then to weigh in through the amendment process.
But right now, under regular order, anyone, the Republicans are in power, but a Democrat can offer an amendment to a Republican bill. It's heard in your committee, and then you guys decide whether it makes the floor or not, right?
That's correct. So the committee itself, we will consider amendments from Republicans and Democrats. Many are offered, and I'm trying to think on the NDAA, for example, the National Defense Authorization Act. We had
80-something amendments.
More than 80.
Was it?
It was more. I think it was more than 1,000 amendments to that bill. Typically,
but 80 made it to the floor.
80 made it to the floor. And so we've got to then, as members of the Rules Committee and our staff,
you went through
go through those amendments to determine if they're parliamentary, if they meet that, if they're germane to the underlying bill, or if there's some other, drafting issue or something with an amendment, so it can't be considered. And we and the staff whittle those down to the amendments that we may consider on the floor for a vote. There are a few ways a bill can come to the floor. One is under a closed rule. That means no amendments can be offered. That's the method that I said was previous before regular order. Another is a structured rule. A structured rule is you can allow amendments, but only certain amendments can be offered, and those amendments must be stipulated in the rule that we pass and vote on out of committee. And another way is through what's called an open rule. And an open rule is this bill's going to go to the floor, and we'll have amendments that can be filed up to in the time of voting, and there's no limit on anything. So an open rule, we had a modified open rule. It was somewhat limited in scope. One of our very first actions in Congress was when we had those 68 different 2-minute votes. That was a structured open rule, which is the most open the process has been in many, many years.
What's the advantage of having something like that?
In terms of having an open, more open process? The advantage, I think, is it gives the rank and file members an opportunity to weigh in on this issue that is before us in any way without limits, within certain reason. Most bills will come to the floor under either a closed or a structured rule, which we determine what amendments we can and can't do. And the benefit of this structured rule is then you don't have people just putting up amendments really for political purposes, for, one party or the other to put just an amendment up just to make a difficult, put someone in a difficult position politically. And so we don't want to play politics with the process. We try to avoid that. We try to be serious about governing here. And I know that Washington gets a bad reputation sometimes for not doing that. But we, through the structured rule process, are able to sort of tamp down the political side of things and keep that at bay.
Why is, on the Rules Committee, why is there such a lopsided number of the majority in that? You said how many members?
9 Republicans and 4 Democrats.
Why is it not more even?
When Republicans took the House, we kept the same numbers that the Democrats had before us in terms of that decision on how many. And that's made by the Speaker. It's the Speaker's appointment. They decide how many Republicans will serve and name the Republicans to the committee. The reason that it is so lopsided in more so than any other committee is it's very powerful. It determines exactly what happens, what's going to be allowed to be debated on the floor. So if it were 50-50, then you would have a stalemate in terms of moving legislation, because it would be almost impossible to get bills out of that type of a committee with that count.
So we get our business done in the House. It goes to the Senate, and it
promptly dies.
It promptly dies. That's got to be frustrating. I know it is for me. How so for you?
Yeah, it is frustrating. Again, I think it's the way our founders intended it to be. Here, it should be a grind. It should be grinding of ideas, and the grinding of ideas then hopefully will come to some consensus. I am in awe when I walk into the House chamber with 435 members of Congress that represent all corners of the United States. We're all there in one room, it's the fabric of the country right there on full display in one room at that moment. And our country is divided. So is our Congress. So is our federal government. Republicans control 1/3 of the federal government. So these ideas that we're processing here, that it ought to be a grind. And so for that, I have respect.
Hey, folks, stay with us. A fascinating conversation with Congresswoman Erin Houchin of Indiana. We're going to talk about why the topic of dyslexia is so important to her, and how does working in the public relations field now help her in Congress. Stay with us. Mark Alford's America continues after this. Welcome back, everyone, to Mark Alford's America, where we give you a behind-the-scenes look at Washington, let you meet some of the fascinating people helping shape our nation. Congresswoman Erin Houchin of Indiana is with us today in room 1516 of Longworth Office Building. Erin, you had a business in public relations. What made you get into that to begin with?
So I was married to, I am still married. I'm still married.
Clear that up.
But my husband was a prosecuting attorney for 16 years, and he's a judge now. I worked in child services for many years and worked very closely with law enforcement. What I saw over time as the police got maybe the defund the police movement and just overall disapproval for police officers, I felt that was really unfair because they do hard work and the public should know about it. I also found I represent, I live in a very rural area, and not every law enforcement entity can afford to hire a full-time PIO. So I just would go and offer to contract with them to do their public relations work. It was developed out of a passion first, but then it fulfilled a need that was really really necessary at the time. So I started in 2019 that small business with just me, and right before the pandemic, great time to start a business.
But during the George Floyd incident?
It was following George Floyd, and I grew that to about 22 clients in the time before I ran for Congress, and could still grow even more. But I felt a calling to come here, and so to do that, I had to give up that business and come to serve.
What was that defining moment like when you decided you were going to run for Congress? It's not an easy decision.
We met with I met with my family. I've got 3 children. They're now 20, 18, and 14, 2 daughters and a son, and my husband. And we make family decisions. We have family meetings that are run by Robert's Rules of Order sometimes. Mom and dad get veto power, but the kids can weigh in and give their input. And I had run in 2016, felt compelled to do that. Prior career, I worked for our U.S.
For this seat you ran?
Yeah. In my prior career, I worked for our U.S. Senator, and so I had that experience, plus working in the legislature, and thought at that time I might be able to have something to offer for constituents. I ran unsuccessfully. I got beat in my primary. Then I was running for re-election to the state legislature when my predecessor announced he was retiring. So I had about 24 hours to make a decision, and it was a quick decision. I was faced with, do I run for re-election and stay in my business? Indiana's a part-time legislature. That I could have done that. I could have walked away from politics altogether at that moment and gone and grown my business, or come to Congress. Met with the family, and ultimately the decision was this was the right thing to do. Continuing the work that we've done at the state level, at the federal level was pretty important. And our family motto is to contend. It's to go out and do the things. Contend, work hard, have fun. And I'm happy to talk about my family motto and why we came up with that. But the idea that if I am capable of doing something and I'm not engaged in the fight was something I just couldn't stand by and not do. So if you can, you should try. It's how my parents raised me. And so it was decided that we were going to do this job.
How did you come up with the idea of just having a family motto? Do you have like a mission statement?
We have a family motto.
Really like a business, almost.
Somewhat. I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
But so my husband did a communion meditation at church, and it was about contending for the faith.
Got it.
And at about the same time, he'd been reading Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, and he talks then about contending for things and contending with things and actually digging into issues and being bold in your approach to life. And so my kids were 8 and 6 and 3 at the time. And he wrote contend on a piece of paper, and he put it on our back door. just to remind us as we leave the house, get out there and go after it. And my very free-spirited 6-year-old daughter wrote, "and have fun" on a piece of paper and stuck that on the door. And then
that was her amendment that passed through the Rules Committee.
And then, passed through the Rules Committee. And then my oldest daughter, who's a type A personality, wrote "work hard" and stuck that between the two pieces of paper. So literally from the time, and again, I said that my oldest is 20 now. When she was 8 years old, those went on the door. Last year for Christmas, my husband finally took those papers off the door, framed them, and they're on our wall.
Wow.
And that's just our approach to life. And that's why I tell my staff, we're going to go out, we're going to work really hard, we're going to fight, we are going to we're going to run down the runway until we have no more for these issues. We're going to have fun. We're doing it. So
one of the issues that you're contending with is dyslexia. Why so?
So I came to that issue as a parent. My son is dyslexic, and he was severely dyslexic in first grade. He would come home and say, I got everything wrong on this paper because I couldn't read it. He was very bright, but and in a high ability classroom, but he could not read. And we discovered, but not until he was in third grade, that he had dyslexia. What we discovered as parents, and again, my husband's got a law degree, I've got my master's degree. We had a really hard time identifying dyslexia, understanding what he was challenged with, how to help him. And then to be on top of that, there were no resources within 2 hours of us. And so we weren't identifying dyslexia in Indiana. We weren't screening kids for dyslexia. It is a reading disability that affects 20% of the population.
20%.
20%. And it's higher for the prison population than it is for the general population. If kids can't read by the time they leave the third grade, they're more likely to drop out of high school. They're more likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. And so knowing what I discovered through my journey as a parent, I put forth legislation in Indiana to identify dyslexia, screen for it, define it, and then go about trying to get resources in my part of the state for other families. So we worked on a nonprofit, my husband and I, and we've trained tutors and teachers, and we've got 87 kids in my home county right now in tutoring for reading disabilities. And that was all born by, my passion for that was all born by being a parent, experiencing that, and understanding that if I am not able to do this, many, many families are sharing this same story and need the help too.
Is there anything on the federal level?
So yes, I have the 21st Century Dyslexia Act, this Congress. Under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, dyslexia is not defined. So some states, like Indiana, have made a definition for it. Which means that when you have a child that has an individualized education plan or an IEP or a 504, they have special needs, they have learning disabilities like dyslexia, then that is listed on their IEP as dyslexia, and it can be defined. But because of the way the federal law is written, it says specific learning disability related to reading, and that's it. In states like Indiana, where we have defined dyslexia, it can say AKA dyslexia. But because IDEA is so strict, this definition is not provided. And therefore, across the country, there's a lot of uncertainty, misdiagnosis, not putting in the proper accommodations. Here's what we know about kids with dyslexia. They're very bright. They cannot learn to read unless you deliver them the methodology in a very specific way. The top 20% of students are going to learn to read no matter how you give them the information. The bottom 20% of students are dyslexic, and they will only learn to read if you deliver it to them in this very specific way. And the students in the middle will learn best if you teach it to them in a way that you teach dyslexic students. In the 80s, we got completely away from phonics-based education to sight words and context clues. And that has done a great disservice to our students across America. Our literacy rates have declined since then. So I'm on a mission here to restore our literacy rates and actually teach the science of reading back to the way that it should be. And part of that is adding this definition in the federal code under IDEA, so everybody knows what we're talking about and they know how to treat it. They know how to help kids. Students with dyslexia will always have dyslexia, But my son, who was diagnosed in the 3rd grade and now a freshman in high school, and any other student who gets the proper accommodations and tutoring, he's reading above grade level, and he's in honors English classes, and
Wow.
he's doing things that I never thought he would be able to do when I was looking back at when he was in 1st grade, having so many struggles and disliking school to such a level that we were worried for him.
Erin, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I'm so proud to know you and be your friend and be your colleague in Congress. Hey, folks, thanks for joining us for Mark Alford's America. We'll talk again next week. Until then, remember, I believe in you. I believe our best days are still ahead of us, and I believe in America.